The defining moments of American history, from the first Thanksgiving to the Apollo moon landing, have happened in what is, geologically speaking, the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, the story of Sub-Saharan Africa began with the planet tearing itself apart. We often think of Africa as a monolithic, jungle-clad continent, but to an American, it's much more shaped by armies, and more by invisible rivers, shifting sands, and a continental-sized tectonic fault line that is literally trying to rip the landmass in half. Forget everything you think you know about rivers and oceans. For thousands of years, the Sahara was a sea, and the Great Rift Valley was the only open highway. The scar that shaped humanity. Our story begins not with humans, but with rock. About 30 million years ago, a massive, sluggish process started deep beneath the surface of the Earth. The African tectonic plate, one of the largest on the planet, began to fracture. This immense geologic event gave rise to the Great Rift Valley, a gigantic, 4,000-mile-long wound that stretches from Syria down to Mozambique. For American travelers used to mountain ranges formed by collision, like the Rockies or the Appalachians, the Rift Valley is a surprise. It's formed by pulling apart. Magma is rising, heating the crust, and forcing the eastern edge of the continent to stretch, thin, and subside. This gigantic geologic scar became the literal cradle of humanity. As the land sank, it created high, cool, and dry plateaus on either side. These elevated walls intercepted moisture from the Indian Ocean, causing the climate to shift. The ancient, dense forests that once blanketed East Africa began to thin out, replaced by savannas and grasslands. This change meant that our ape-like ancestors could no longer rely solely on climbing trees. The shift from forest to savanna is the most important geographical transition in human history. It drove the necessity of standing up, bipedalism, to better see over tall grasses and carry food across open ground. Every time you stand up, you are, in a sense, honoring the ancient geographic forces of the Great Rift Valley. Sites like Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, and Turkana, Kenya, are not randomly selected. They are the geological catchment areas where sediments, and crucially fossils, accumulated for millions of years, perfectly preserving the evidence of our evolution. The Rift Valley is also a chain of freshwater wonders. Due to the deep fissures, water collects and creates massive, deep lakes. Tanganyika, the world's longest freshwater lake, Malawi or Nyasa, and Victoria, though technically sitting on the rift's shoulders, not in the valley floor. These lakes are vital not just for water, but for science. Lake Tanganyika, for example, is so deep and ancient that it hosts species of fish, cichlids, found nowhere else on Earth, a living, liquid laboratory of evolution, mirroring the speciation that happened on land. But the rift has a contradictory geographical role. It acted as an initial conveyor belt, a corridor leading early humans south, but its rugged volcanic terrain and sheer height also made it an enormous natural barrier, isolating populations and forcing subsequent migrations to follow paths of least resistance, often along the coast or through the deep interior. The Sahara, the uncrossable sea. While the Rift Valley opened up the east, a single monumental geographical feature slammed the door on the north, the Sahara Desert. The Sahara is the single most important geographical reality when understanding Sub-Saharan Africa's history, and it is a concept often misunderstood by Americans. It is not merely a big desert. It is the largest hot desert in the world, the size of the entire United States, and for most of history, it acted as a complete, uncrossable oceanic barrier. For millennia, the Sahara effectively isolated the civilizations developing along the Mediterranean Sea, Egypt, Rome, Greece, from the vast lands south of the desert. The lack of navigable rivers flowing between the north and the south was critical. The Nile flows north, the Niger flows east and south, and the Congo flows west. There is no geographic highway connecting the two worlds. This extreme isolation meant that the cultures and political organizations of Sub-Saharan Africa developed largely independently of the Mediterranean world until the introduction of the camel, the ship of the desert, around 300 CE. Without the camel, the journey was suicidal. The desert forced a different kind of technological, social, and economic organization to emerge in places like Ghana, Mali, and Shanghai, empires built not on armies crossing fertile plains, but on the control of resources, gold, salt, and slaves, that could be transported across sand. The Sahara created a profound linguistic and technological split. The region above the Sahara became part of the Eurasian sphere, utilizing wheeled carts, horses, and later Mediterranean scripts. Below the Sahara, until very late, many cultures developed without wheels, relying instead on foot travel and river canoes, and utilizing completely different ironworking techniques that emerged independently. The sheer geographical difficulty of connecting these two zones resulted in a massive difference in historical pacing and resource utilization. Crucially, the Sahara, along with the tsetse fly belt to the south, meant that the major domestic animals, horses, cattle, and donkeys, that powered Eurasian and North African agriculture and warfare could not be easily adopted in wide swaths of Sub-Saharan Africa, forcing distinct, sometimes slower patterns of development. The problem of the coastline. If the Rift Valley provided the cradle and the Sahara provided the wall, the coastline presented the final geographical frustration: a massive lack of usable harbors. Unlike Europe, which is a peninsula-rich, fragmented continent with countless natural deep-water ports, think Italy, Greece, and Scandinavia, Africa's outline is remarkably smooth, almost a perfect gigantic oval. This lack of deep coastal indentation means fewer natural harbors protected from the ocean's violence. For European explorers and traders, this was a massive logistical problem. They could set up small trading centers, but establishing large, defensible natural ports was incredibly difficult. The coastal areas were often mangrove swamps or beaches, and the rivers, which might have led into the interior, were choked with a final, devastating geographical feature that we'll discuss in the next part: the waterfalls and rapids. The geography of Sub-Saharan Africa is not a story of conquest across easy plains, but a relentless narrative of overcoming gigantic natural boundaries. It is a world carved by isolation, elevated by tectonic upheaval, and protected by vast seas of sand and sheer-sided coasts.
If you study a map of the world, Africa's great rivers, the Congo, the Niger, and the Zambezi, appear like magnificent natural highways, promising access deep into the continent's heart. In America, we understand the Missouri and the Mississippi as the arteries of expansion, flowing for thousands of miles, navigable from the Gulf of Mexico up to the interior, facilitating trade and settlement. The same is true of Europe's Rhine and Danube. This assumption is one of the biggest misconceptions about Sub-Saharan Africa. The reality is that the continent's major rivers are, by and large, highways to nowhere. This is not a failure of engineering. It is a direct consequence of the geology we discussed in Part 1, the ancient, unfragmented continental plate. The surprising truth is that Africa is a gigantic, inverted serving dish, a high-rimmed plateau. The center of the continent sits at a high elevation, only dropping off sharply near the coast. When the great rivers that flow across the flat interior reach this coastal rim, they don't gently meander to the sea, they plunge. This geographical reality created a devastating logistical hurdle for both indigenous travel and, later, for European penetration. The Congo, the trapped giant. The Congo River, the second longest river in the world by length and the deepest, is the perfect illustration of this paradox. It carries more water than any other river except the Amazon and drains a basin that spans 1.5 million square miles. It should be the Mississippi of Africa. For long stretches, it is. The Congo is perfectly navigable for nearly 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers, through the central rainforest basin, forming an enormous liquid trading network that supported vast kingdoms and localized economies. But here is the geographical killer. The entire force of this mighty river is bottled up, trapped by the coastal plateau. Before it can empty into the Atlantic Ocean, the Congo must drop over 900 feet, 275 meters, in just 220 miles, 354 kilometers. This final catastrophic descent is known as Livingstone Falls. Livingstone Falls is not one big waterfall like Niagara. It is a monstrous series of 32 cataracts and violent churning rapids. They are utterly unnavigable even today. This means that a ship coming from the Atlantic Ocean could not get past the first 100 miles of the coast. Conversely, any civilization that developed in the vast, resource-rich Central Basin was permanently cut off from the sea and world trade, forcing goods to be unloaded, carried overland, a grueling multi-week process called portage, and reloaded on the other side. This geographical obstruction alone effectively delayed foreign access to the heart of Central Africa for centuries. The Zambezi, the plateau's edge. The same pattern is repeated in South Africa with the Zambezi River. It too flows across a high, flat plateau, supporting agriculture and local fishing economies. But as it approaches the coast, it encounters a dramatic geological drop. The most famous manifestation of this drop is Smoke That Thunders, which we know as Victoria Falls. This single geographical feature, where the entire river drops 350 feet into a deep chasm, represents a hard stop on any commercial navigation attempting to reach the interior from the east coast. Like the Congo, the Zambezi is interrupted by rapids and waterfalls both above and below Victoria Falls, turning a potential 1,000-mile highway into fragmented short stretches of usable waterway. The Niger, the river that runs backwards. West Africa offers a variation on the river paradox, the Niger River. The Niger, the continent's third longest river, flows in a massive, surprising crescent shape, heading northeast deep into the Saharan fringe before curving sharply southeast back toward the coast. The surprising part of the Niger is the inland Niger Delta. Instead of flowing directly to the sea, the river slows down dramatically in the Sahel region of Mali, creating a massive area of lakes, marshes, and channels, roughly the size of Belgium. This delta is a geographical miracle, a vast fertile oasis in the semi-arid Sahel, sustaining cities like Djenné and providing the agricultural and fishing base that powered the great West African empires, Mali, Songhai. For the ancient West African kingdoms, this inland delta was vital. It was a navigable waterway that allowed the movement of salt from the Sahara, gold from the forests, and foodstuffs, connecting the forest regions with the desert trade routes. But what did it mean for access to the Atlantic? Again, frustration. The lower Niger is also punctuated by rapids and seasonal variation, making it less reliable for sustained maritime trade than the early explorers hoped. The river was a highly effective internal engine of trade, but a poor connection to the external. The triple biological barrier. If the rivers and coast protected the interior physically, the climate and ecology provided an equally potent, silent defense. The triple biological barrier. This invisible geographical reality was often more lethal to foreign invaders than any army. The tsetse fly and the absence of the horse. The tsetse fly is arguably one of the most significant geographical factors in preventing the widespread adoption of key Eurasian technologies in Sub-Saharan Africa. The tsetse fly carries trypanosonoxis, or sleeping sickness, a disease lethal to cattle, horses, and yes, humans. This is why horses, the engine of agriculture, transport, and cavalry warfare in Eurasia, were largely confined to the dry grasslands of the Sahel, where the fly couldn't survive, and absent from the humid, tsetse-infested belts further south and west. This geographical exclusion of the horse meant that warfare relied on infantry and local organization, not massed cavalry charges. Agriculture remained highly reliant on human labor, the hoe. rather than the plow, which requires draught animals like oxen or horses. This limits the scale of farming and population density. Long-distance transport relied overwhelmingly on porters carrying goods on their heads, an incredibly inefficient system compared with wagons or pack animals. The disease environment: malaria and yellow fever. Sub-Saharan Africa is home to a unique and hyper-virulent ecosystem of tropical diseases, most notably malaria and yellow fever. These diseases, carried by mosquitoes, acted as a lethal barrier, famously dubbed the white man's grave by 19th century Europeans. While indigenous populations often developed partial immunities or resistance over time, outsiders, whether from North Africa, the Middle East, or Europe, lacked this resistance. The geographical placement of humid, high rainfall regions and stagnant water created perfect breeding grounds for the Anopheles and Aedes mosquitoes. For centuries, this biological defense killed foreigners so rapidly that coastal trading outposts remained tiny, isolated enclaves, unable to penetrate or control the disease-ridden interior. This environmental protection dramatically delayed the period of European colonization until the late 19th century, when quinine and medical advances provided a partial, though not far perfect, solution. 3. Climate and soils: the illusion of fertility. The final component of the barrier is the deceptive nature of tropical agriculture. To an outsider, the rainforests and jungles appear lush and fertile, suggesting an agricultural paradise. This is another geographic surprise. Much of the soil in the tropical belt is laterite, or iron-rich clay. In a tropical climate, heavy rainfall rapidly leaches nutrients from the topsoil. The fertility of the rainforest is not in the ground, but in the biomass, the living plants. Once the forest is cut down, the underlying soil is quickly depleted and bakes hard under the intense sun, making sustained intensive farming very difficult without modern techniques. This geographical reality mandated the use of shifting cultivation in many areas, a sustainable method where plots are farmed briefly and then allowed to return to forest to recover fertility. While sustainable for local populations, it limited the potential for massive, high-yield, densely populated agricultural empires comparable to those that arose on the rich, deep floodplains of the Nile, Yangtze, or Mississippi. The combination of unnavigable rivers, the fatal tsetse fly, and lethal disease created a continental defense system unparalleled anywhere else in the world, ensuring the independent and distinct historical trajectory of sub-Saharan civilizations for thousands of years.
The story of wealth and power in sub-Saharan Africa is not one of coastal development, as it is in much of Europe or East Asia. Instead, it is a story of interior empires that thrived in the geographical tension zone between the total isolation of the desert and the total defense of the deep forest. This zone is the Sahel, an Arabic word meaning shore or coast. It is the southern fringe of the Sahara, a vast semi-arid grassland that acts as the geographical and ecological transition zone between the hyper-arid desert to the north and the humid, tsetse-ridden forests to the south. For centuries, the Sahel was the ideal setting for two critical human developments: the rise of agriculture and the consolidation of political power. It was dry enough to avoid the worst of the tropical diseases like the tsetse fly belt, yet wet enough, receiving just enough seasonal rainfall, to sustain drought-resistant grains like millet and sorghum. Critically, it was also the geographic limit of the horse and cattle, meaning that Sahelian kingdoms could raise armies and supply transport in a way that the forest kingdoms further south could not. The Iron Revolution and the Bantu expansion. Before the great empires, an even more fundamental geographical and technological movement transformed the continent: the widespread adoption of ironworking. While iron emerged in Eurasia around the same time,
The timing and dispersal of this technology across sub-Saharan Africa have a profound geographical explanation. Around 1000 BCE, iron smelting was independently developed in several pockets of sub-Saharan Africa. The most significant dispersal of this technology is linked to the Bantu expansion, one of the largest migrations in human history. The original Bantu-speaking people likely originated in the area around modern Nigeria, Cameroon. Armed with iron tools and weapons, their migration was not a military campaign, but a slow, geographical process driven by new technology and population growth. The geographic advantage of iron. Agriculture. Iron axes and hoes made clearing the dense rainforest and working the tough, laterite soils far more efficient than stone tools. This geographical advantage allowed the Bantu to expand their agricultural base into areas previously too difficult to cultivate. Defense. Iron-tipped spears and arrows gave them an edge over groups still using stone or bone. Adaptation. As they migrated south and east, they carried with them the knowledge of new crops like the banana and taro imported from Southeast Asia via Indian Ocean trade, and farming techniques perfectly suited to the tropical environments they encountered. Over a period of 2,000 years, this population wave spread, utilizing the geographical corridors of the Rift Valley and the Great Savannas, eventually reaching the southern tip of the continent. The result of this geographically driven migration is that hundreds of distinct languages spoken today, from West Africa to South Africa, belong to the same linguistic family. A massive demographic footprint enabled by an iron tool and a commitment to farming the tough African soil. The geographic engine. Gold from the south, salt from the north. The greatest political entities of West Africa, the empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, were built entirely on the geographic imbalance of two critical commodities, gold and salt. These empires emerged in the Sahel because that is where the two primary trade streams met and had to be controlled. The gold source, the south. The richest gold deposits lay not in the Sahel itself, but deep in the forested areas to the south, in regions known as Wangara, near the headwaters of the Senegal and Niger rivers, today parts of Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and Guinea. This region, protected by the Tsetse belt and dense jungle, was impenetrable to the large armies and horses of the Sahelian kingdoms, and certainly to the traders from North Africa. This geographical inaccessibility led to a crucial economic arrangement, the silent trade. The gold miners of the south would leave their gold, usually in dust or nuggets, in designated spots and retreat. The northern merchants, often Berbers or Tuareg, would then leave an equivalent amount of salt or copper and retreat in turn. This system of indirect trade, necessitated by linguistic differences and the desire of the gold-producing peoples to conceal the location of their mines, ensured that the gold remained securely in the hands of the interior kingdoms of the Sahel. The salt source, the north. The Sahara, though a barrier, also supplied the crucial missing ingredient for life, salt. The diet of people living in the humid, tropical south was low on salt, as it was constantly sweated out, making it a critical, desired commodity. The Sahelian empires controlled the trading cities that sat directly on the southern edge of the desert, where massive salt deposits could be mined, such as Tagaza and later Taudeni. Salt, mined in massive slabs, was literally as valuable as gold ounce for ounce in the south. The geographical middlemen, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. The three great empires that rose and fell in succession, roughly 800 CE to 1600 CE, were geographic gatekeepers. Their power was not based on conquering and holding distant lands, but on controlling the intersection points of the north-south trade axis and managing the flow of the gold-salt exchange. Ghana, CE 830 to 1235, located at the confluence of the two main trans-Saharan routes. Its power came from levying taxes on all goods, salt, textiles, copper, and slaves going south, gold going north. The geographic location of its capital, Kumbi Saleh, made it the necessary gateway between the two resource zones. Mali, CE 1235 to 1600, expanded its geographical reach further south, bringing the gold-producing regions under closer, though still indirect, influence. Mali's great cities, most famously Timbuktu, became globally renowned centers of scholarship and trade. Timbuktu's location on the Great Bend of the Niger River meant that it leveraged the river as an internal transport system, discussed in Part 2, to move goods between the Sahel and the forest, further cementing its geographical dominance over the trade flow. The famous pilgrimage of Mansa Musa to Mecca demonstrated the immense wealth derived from this geographically controlled trade. Songhai, CE 1464 to 1591. Following Mali, Songhai's rise centered on the city of Gao, also on the Niger River, but further east. They controlled an even larger stretch of the river and expanded east and west across the Sahelian plains, dominating the trade routes until internal conflicts and the superior geographical advantage of Moroccan musketeers who crossed the Sahara and conquered Songhai in 1591 finally broke the Sahelian hegemony. The collapse of Songhai marks the end of an era where sub-Saharan African geography primarily defined indigenous prosperity. As the focus of global trade shifted from overland desert routes to maritime ocean routes, a development we'll cover in the next part, the location of these magnificent interior empires, once an asset, became a devastating liability. They were too far from the sea, and the new Atlantic economy would bypass them completely.